Okay, I'm going to give you a couple personal examples of people who misunderstood facts related to me. Again, the root causes of factual disputes are people to understand them and or they don't like them. Okay? So this is an old study I did as part of my doctorate. That's back in the Paleozoic time. And I did my doctorate in Minnesota, which is the state in the upper central part of the United States. They were on the border next to Lake Superior. And part of the study was looking at water quality in a stream over a year. And we knew at that time there was a lot of acid rain being dumped on eastern United States, and that's the red colors that you see, red and orange. And that came from burning of coal. And the wind direction was west to east, and I was looking at an area, well, the dot's in the wrong place. The dot should be over where the number 6 is in Minnesota there. And way up there on the top. Way up there. Okay, that's where I did my work. And so I was doing the study and analyzing it, and I came up with, and this is the paradigm, this is what everybody knew, everybody understood this, and I published a paper. I won't go over the title, you can read it, and that's what it looked like, Filson Creek, middle of a bog, there I am sampling. And the key is that the acidity in acid rain comes from sulfuric acid. The coal that was burned contained a mineral that had sulfur, and when it was burned, it converted to sulfuric acid. So the pH of the water, how acidic it was, would be low, coming down in rain, and the rain would also have a lot of sulfate in it, which is the element related to the way the sulfur was transformed to sulfate. And pH is just I won't tell you what the technical is. Everyone knows that neutral pH is 7, neutral shampoo and vinegar and batteries have low pH that burn your hands. And then the other side, you have very high pH, such as bleach, and that'll burn your hands as well. Okay, so the key is if you have acid rain, the pH should drop and the sulfate should go up. It's pretty simple. So here's the diagram from the paper. It's old. I had to hand draft it. That's why it's so crappy looking. But you have the pH at the top, and you can sort of see right around May it goes down, and when it goes down, the sulfate comes up. So I said this is related to acid rain that must be also affecting northern Minnesota. I submitted for publication, and this is literally what the reviewer said. Siegel is perpetrating bad data on an unsuspecting public. Pretty tough stuff. Say, what? What is he talking about? What they didn't understand was that during parts of the year, you get some storm tracks that would do that, and it drag enough sulfate up into northern Minnesota to actually create an acid rain problem up there too. And so this is a case of people who didn't understand the new facts. And so it took several iterations to get it published, and I had to explain, the mechanism. The second was not liking new facts, and this was much more difficult situation for me. It has to do with fracking. I'm being very cautious here because Oasis says I shouldn't talk about controversial things too much. But everyone knows about fracking. People are afraid it poisons water and air. And so I published a paper a couple years back where I looked at the methane in water wells in part of Pennsylvania, and I didn't just sample a few wells, 100. I sampled, the group sampled 30,000 wells. We sampled every well basically in a couple counties of Pennsylvania. So there's no sampling issue that I didn't, miss it. It was pretty clear. And from that, I came to the conclusion that there's no evidence that drilling gas wells in Pennsylvania, where people had thought there would be a lot of problem, there's actually no evidence to suggest that you have more methane in drinking water from the drilling than elsewise. All right, so this was picked up by Science magazine, and so that's a big venue, picked up by the New York Times then. And then the environmental community could not refute it because I had the entire population sampled. And I sampled using the same protocols they did in other studies that purportedly showed contamination using 10 to 100 samples. Theirs is within this. There was no way to refute the data. In fact, there was no interpretation at all. It was just raw statistics, and I used every statistical method known on Earth, and they all said there's no relationship. So what the environmental opponents to fracking did is they discovered an error I did make, but it was an honest error. When I published the paper, I didn't indicate that I got paid 1 month's summer salary by the people who provided me the data, which was a gas company. And before I published it, I remember talking to the editor of the journal and talking to my colleagues, should I indicate a month's summer salary? And they said, no, that's not enough to be worth. I mean, it's very little. I mean, it's not anything. And I said, oh, okay. And I remember feeling maybe I shouldn't. Well, so they brought me up on an ethics charge because they didn't like the results. They couldn't refute it. They didn't like it. And you can't challenge the scientists, so they challenged me. And if I didn't have to go to Washington and testify on it, to Congress, to the Space Science Technology Committee of the House. A legal brief was submitted to SU, 50 pages long, by an environmental group that demanded I should resign or retire. If not, I should be fired. And that's the only night I lost sleep because I didn't know where SU would fall in on this. SU is a very liberal university, but the chancellor and the community said, no, Don did nothing wrong at all. And then after, I immediately disclosed in a supplement document and it went away. So, I was not fired. So even in my world, and these aren't major things like the politics, I find that some people don't understand science. They immediately go after me. There was another paper I submitted where they said I was so sloppy, I plotted my data upside down and didn't even know it. They just couldn't believe it. Another review was, I love these reviews, no one on the continent, meaning Europe, could possibly believe this. It was a British reviewer, another piece of work. And I go on the number of rejections I had and with multiple submissions because people didn't like the results. They more often than not couldn't explain them with an alternative hypothesis. They just didn't like them. So they wanted to kill it. So it happens all over. So another thing we ought to talk about in terms of facts is how accurate and precise they have to be. I argue, and in fact my consulting is always back of the envelope math. I don't use calculus, I use algebra. I use very simple math to solve environmental problems. You don't need high-end math. Climate change, we knew it was going to happen in 1962, and that was done on the back of the envelope by a professor named Wally Broker. And he predicted it in the 1960s, and I just saw a paper even earlier than that. They didn't have computers and climate modelers. They just had a piece of paper and calculated if you increase the CO2, what should happen. More or less. And they got it right. So you have accuracy and precision. Now in music, some music, you've got to be really accurate and precise. So there's the great Segovia. I'm a guitar player, so I play the guitars. So classical music, you have to be accurate and precise. That's the nature of it. Or you could be Django Reinhardt, who's my hero in jazz guitar. That doesn't mean anything, because it's improvisation. You play with it, you twist it, you change it, and that's why I like it. And it's kind of like the way I do my science. You can still hear the melody, but it's not accurate and precise. I can still show you the science, but it doesn't have to be terribly accurate and precise. Now, in our world, there's some things, data and science, in fact, have to be both accurate and precise. For example, you're doing brain surgery, you better be accurate and precise. There's no latitude for error. If you're going to build a space shuttle, you better be accurate and precise, or it's going to come down and lives will be lost. And if you build a network for energy in the United States, that better be pretty accurate and precise too, because if it fails, there's a lot of consequence. But some things that we normally use, you don't realize how the latitude of how not accurate and precise they are. For example, the pills you take. You go and you say, all right, take this amount of Tylenol for your headache. Okay, they're being really conservative. You probably could take 2 or 3 times and it won't hurt you. Or you could take less. There's a lot of latitude there. They're precautionary there. They want to give it a lot of latitude. If you make a mistake, you're not going to get sick, but you don't have a whole bottle. Your car, huge tolerances. They don't build that exactly. You know, you could run your car up to 100 miles, 120 miles an hour, and it probably won't blow your engine out. I've had students, unfortunately, do that when I don't know with our vehicles, and hey, I broke 100. Don't you do that, you know? But obviously, they're not engineered like a Ferrari to do it for a long time, but there's tolerance, they're not going to fail. All right? Bridges are built over-engineered so they won't fall. So they say, this is our expected amount of cars and weight. All right, let's double it, triple it, however, to make sure, just in case. You know, Ringling Brothers came across all the elephants, it won't come down. They don't have elephants anymore. But, all right, so we accept low tolerances of accuracy and precision in a lot of the technology we don't realize. So they're engineered to accommodate high tolerances. So not all data has to be really accurate and precise. Here's an example I like. Let's say you're going to drive from New York to Los Angeles. And it's going to take... You're driving by car, and it's going to be, you can take several routes, and you have 41 hours. You don't have to be too precise. If I gave you that, and I said, that's what it's going to be, you say, okay, if it isn't 41 and it's 39, I'll be a little happier. If it's 50 hours, maybe even 60, I can deal with that. I mean, it's a chunk of time, right? It's a couple days anyway, 3 days, long hours, all right? Now, if you fly it, it's 5 hours and 50 minutes, and there you expect a bit more precision. Because usually, I mean, if suddenly you wind up, you're in an 8-hour flight because of delays, you really get upset. You don't anticipate that, and it's not a tolerance of error that you're willing to accept. If you get there sooner, you're all the happier. And if you go by bike, it's a huge tolerance. I mean, you're going to be spending, 257 hours biking, and it could be twice that, and you could say that's probably okay, given you're on a bicycle and what could happen. So error and precision, it depends on the situation. You don't always need the exact thing. So, I'm not sure where I am here. I'm at the end, in case this really worked pretty well. Summary. There are social reasons to control that control the acceptance of real facts. It's social. It's not the data. It's not the data any longer. Now, this is a new thing. Back in the 60s, 70s, and so forth, facts were what controlled things. Bryce brought me this just today. And it's an essay by John Fitzpatrick, who's the Louis Agassiz director of the Sapsucker Woods, wherever that is. Must be around here. Cornell. And he goes through a discussion. Judy. Oh, Judy brought it. I'm sorry. Judy brought it. And this is a little short essay. It's really kind of cool, talking about how the Roman Catholic Church and Galileo and so on. But at the end it says, all this progress in science that we've made is threatened by post-truth reality. That's what I would have worked that in here. Post-truth reality, which harkens back to Galileo's era. Facts do not matter, or somehow can coexist with respective anti-facts, such that neither holds sway over the other. Mountains of peer-reviewed evidence and robust scientific consensus are swept aside or suppressed in this worldview. I don't believe in climate change replaces let's examine the evidence. And it talks how this is a weather change, so to speak, in how we view the world around us. And it's becoming very divisive. And clearly it's not us showing the facts to the other person that's going to make a whit of difference. That early paper on I showed you, the more you knew about science, the more you're entrenched in whatever view you had, regardless of what the science was. So we have to find ways to reach out to the other side and understand the social influences that are governing their decision-making and how to talk to those while we present our science to them. As a scientist, I find that often really difficult to do because the other side is spouting to me irrationality. But there is rationality in the context of the worldview they look at. And I find if you give them some credence, then they often will come back and they'll start giving your position some better thought. The best example is my friend next door, the Marine. We started talking politics about Hillary, and he was spouting the line, she's running a child prostitution ring out of a Pizza Hut, and I said, what are you talking about, And then after a while, I recognized the big issue, really, is that he had this problem with a woman who was very aggressive. And then we talked about that, and we talked about other women, we talked about his wife, we talked about what do you want in women, all that. And then he began to soften. Really. And the discussion I had with him this morning, he's going nuts over the current president. In part because he and if anyone saw the series on Vietnam, okay, and the ones going up the hills and going back down the hills, the slaughter, he was there. He was in the helicopters. He saw the carnage. And he is worried to death that we may go to another war. And he voted for Trump because he wanted us out of the Middle Eastern wars. And now he sees we may be going into one in Iran and one in Korea. And he is beside himself. He's not yet come around to say, I'm going to vote for a Democrat, but he has changed his view. Okay, and he's also changed his view on some social issues, on guns, particularly after the last slaughter. And in fact, before then, he said nobody, even though he's NRA and all that, he said nobody should have an automatic military weapon. He says, I know what they are, and if I shot it in my house, it'd go through not only my house, but your house and the next house next door. That's how powerful they are. You don't hunt with those weapons. He says, so they should be banned. He said that long before the current discussion. But he wanted all the shotguns and pistols and all that other stuff. So, but I open up and I listen and I say, I kind of agree with that. Even if I don't necessarily, I think I agree with part of that. What do you think of this? Is any of this that you might agree with? And then we actually get to discussion. And he was about as right-wing as you can imagine. And he still is right-wing, but we can talk. And in the sense of facts, that's what you have to do. You have to see what social issue is driving the other side. My social issue is I believe in facts. I'm a scientist. That's what drives me. Evidence-based everything. But other people have different social constructs. And I have to respect them if I want to make any getting purchase and discussing with them. And you have to be almost trained to do that in a way. Okay. And I think, last thing. I still have a few more minutes. Should we take a break here? Let's take a break, take some questions. I remember there's one more section, and it's the best section. It's the very best section. Yeah.
Isn't this going to get worse with the internet? I mean, the social regions.
Oh, yeah.
If they can find other people that agree with them on the internet.
Mm-hmm. The internet has been remarkably driving the social division. When it first came out, everyone's saying how wonderful this is going to be. It's going to democratize information, and what it's done is the exact opposite. It's allowed people to form their own little echo chambers and stay in them. And it's very hard to get people to get out of them. Now, my partner in my little environmental business, Ed Hinchy, extremely smart man, and he was formerly a CEO of a big international firm or a partner in a big international firm. And so Ed, I said, where do you get your news? He says, well, I get it from Breitbart and Al Jazeera and the BBC. I said, Breitbart? He says, yeah, you ought to read it. Yeah, the format is off-putting, and they do have a lot of wild stuff, but they also occasionally come up with something in a way that you've never thought about it before. And that's what he likes about it. And Al Jazeera, he says, it seems pretty balanced to him, except on issues related to Israel. But other issues, they seem pretty balanced. Now, I speak to members in my Jewish community, I say, well, I think I'm going to look at Al Jazeera, and because it's negative to Israel, they don't want to look at any of it. So it's a one-issue thing. And so, but it's easy to lock yourself into Fox or MSNBC, you know, and just say that's the only thing I'm getting my news from.